A predator shoved her aside. She lifted him and hurled him off the platform. An HFY story in 3 parts. Part 1, The Station. Orbital Junction 9 hung in the darkness between stars like a jewel made of metal and light. It was old, older than most species remembered, built by hands that had turned to dust long before humanity learned to look up at the sky and wonder. Now it served as a place where the galaxy came to talk, to trade, and sometimes to fight. Ambassador Lyra had called this place home for 18 months. She was not special by galactic standards. She was short, barely reaching the chest of most species she worked with. Her skin was soft, easy to cut, easy to bruise. She had no claws, no venom, no armored plates. When the other ambassadors looked at her, they saw something small and fragile, like a creature that had wandered into the wrong part of the forest. She did not correct them. That was not her job. Her job was to sit in rooms where the air smelled wrong, and the gravity pulled at her bones in strange ways. Her job was to smile when species with teeth the length of her fingers made jokes about eating her. Her job was to negotiate trade deals and mining rights and shipping lanes, to find common ground between creatures that had been killing each other since before her species had discovered fire. She was good at her job. The people who sent her here had chosen well. The station was always busy. A dozen species moved through its corridors at any hour, their footsteps and voices mixing into a constant hum. The walked on 4 legs, their bodies covered in fur the color of autumn leaves. The skittered along the walls, their shells clicking against the metal. The floated in spheres of water, communicating through flashes of bioluminescent light. And then there were predators, not the way humans use the word, to describe animals that hunted other animals. There were predators the way a storm was a predator, the way a wildfire was a predator. They came from a world where everything that lived had to fight for every breath, and they had won. They had won so completely that when they finally reached the stars, they had looked at the other species of the galaxy and seen nothing that scared them. Commander was the worst of them. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in scales the color of dried blood. His eyes were amber, bright and cold, and they tracked movement the way a hunting animal's eyes tracked prey. When he walked, other species moved out of his way. When he spoke, they listened. Not because they respected him, because they were afraid. Lyra had dealt with many times over the past 18 months. She had learned to read the subtle movements of his tail, the way his claws flexed when he was angry, the particular hiss that meant he was about to say something cruel. She had learned to stand her ground when he loomed over her, to keep her voice steady when he bared his teeth. She had never learned to like him. She suspected no one had. The trade delegation had been going on for 3 days now. The subject was mining rights in the belt, a ring of asteroids rich in metals that a dozen species wanted to claim. Humanity had arrived late to the galactic stage, and their claim was weak. Lyra knew this. She had spent months preparing arguments, gathering data, building relationships with species who might support her. It had not been enough. The talks had stalled on the 2nd day, and by the 3rd, everyone knew that nothing would be decided. They wanted the belt for themselves. They had the ships to take it and the weapons to hold it. The only thing stopping them was politics, the complicated web of alliances and agreements that kept the galaxy from falling into open war. Did not like being stopped by politics. The meeting was held on Platform 7, a circular room with windows that looked out at the stars. The floor was made of a material that adjusted to different gravities, so each species could stand comfortably. The table in the center was enormous, large enough to seat representatives from every faction. Lyra stood near the edge of the platform, reviewing her notes on a handheld device. She was preparing for the afternoon session, trying to find some angle she had not yet tried. The other delegates had not yet arrived. Only was there, standing at the windows, staring out at the darkness. She did not speak to him. There was nothing to say. The doors opened, and the other delegates began to enter. The ambassador came first, her 4 legs moving in a careful rhythm. Behind her came the representative, his shell gleaming under the lights. Then the floating in their sphere, their lights flickering in greeting. Turned from the window, his eyes moved over the arriving delegates, and something in his expression changed. Lyra had seen that look before. It was the look of a predator that had decided to stop waiting. He walked toward the table, his footsteps heavy on the adjusting floor. The other delegates stepped aside, giving him room. He did not acknowledge them. His attention was fixed on the table, on the empty seat that belonged to the consortium of free worlds, a collection of smaller species that had banded together for protection. The consortium had been the swing vote. If they sided with humanity, the claim would be weakened. If they sided with it would be humanity that lost. For 3 days, they had refused to commit, waiting to see which way the wind was blowing. Today, their seat was empty. Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "It seems," he said, his voice carrying across the platform, "that the small ones have chosen wisdom over courage. They know where their survival lies." The other delegates said nothing. They had seen this before. When they decided to press their advantage, there was nothing to do but wait for the storm to pass. Lyra did not look up from her device. She was reading a message that had just arrived, a message from the consortium explaining their decision. They were sorry. They had families. They hoped she would understand. She understood. She did not blame them, but understanding did not change what was about to happen. "Perhaps," continued, walking toward her, "the humans should also consider their position. They are new to this galaxy. They have much to learn about how things work here, about who leads and who follows." Lyra looked up, was standing in front of her now, close enough that she could smell him. He smelled like copper and something else, something sharp and wrong. The smell of a creature that had evolved to kill. "I appreciate the advice," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "But humanity's position has not changed." His eyes narrowed, his claws flexed at his sides. "You should reconsider. My patience has limits." "Then I suggest you work on that. Patience is a useful skill in diplomacy." For a moment, he said nothing. The other delegates had stopped moving, stopped breathing. The room was silent except for the hum of the station's systems. Then moved. His hand came up fast, faster than something that large should be able to move. His palm struck her shoulder, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to send her stumbling. Hard enough to send her device clattering across the floor. Hard enough to make a point. He did not look at her as she stumbled. He was already walking toward the table, toward the other delegates who actually mattered, toward species that were worth his attention. "Now," he said, his voice carrying across the platform, "let us discuss the future of the belt among those who have earned a voice in such matters." Lyra caught herself. Her hand found the railing at the edge of the platform, her fingers closing around the cold metal. She stood there for a moment, breathing, feeling the bruise already forming on her shoulder. The other delegates were watching, some with pity, some with relief that it had not been them, none with surprise. This was how the galaxy worked. The strong did what they wanted. The weak endured. Lyra straightened. She released the railing. She turned to face back. And something very old woke up behind her eyes. It was not anger, not exactly. Anger was hot and loud, and this was neither. This was quiet. This was patient. This was the thing that her ancestors had carried across savannas and through ice ages, the thing that had made them chase prey until it collapsed, the thing that had made them pick up rocks and bones and learn to throw. This was the thing that had made them human. She took a step forward, then another. Her footsteps were quiet on the adjusting floor, lost in the sound of his voice as he addressed the delegates. He did not hear her coming. Why would he? She was small and soft, a prey animal that had forgotten its place. She was not a threat. He had no idea what was about to happen. Part 2, the lift. The galaxy had made assumptions about humanity. They had looked at the soft skin, the blunt teeth, the bodies that bruised and bled so easily, and they had drawn their conclusions. Prey species. Cooperative because they had to be. Diplomatic because they had no other choice. They had not asked the right questions. They had not wondered why a species with no natural weapons had come to rule their planet. They had not asked what had happened to the giant cats, the massive bears, the wolves that had once hunted in packs across every continent. They had not asked why humans walked upright, or why their shoulders were built the way they were, or why they could run for hours without stopping. They had seen weakness, where there was something else entirely. Lyra's ancestors had not survived by being stronger than the things that hunted them. They had survived by being smarter, by being more patient, by refusing to give up. They had invented persistence hunting, a technique so simple and so terrible that most species could not believe it when they heard about it. Humans would pick a target, any target, and then they would follow it. Not run after it, not chase it, just follow. Walk after it while it ran. Track it through forest and across plain and up mountains. Let it tire itself out while they kept coming. Eventually, the prey would collapse. Exhaustion would claim it. And then the humans would be there, patient and calm, ready to finish what they had started. The galaxy did not know about persistence hunting. They did not know about the dense muscle fibers that let humans lift far more than their size suggested. They did not know about the cooling systems that kept human bodies from overheating, the sweat that let them work for hours in conditions that would kill other species. They did not know about the skeletal structure that made human shoulders perfect for throwing, or the grip strength that could crush metal, or the pain tolerance that let humans keep fighting long after their bodies should have stopped. They did not know that humans had hunted their own megapredators to extinction, every single one. The giant cats, the terror birds, the wolves, the bears, all of them gone, killed by creatures that looked like prey. They did not know that after humans had run out of things to hunt, they had turned to fighting each other, for thousands of years, just to stay sharp. Lyra knew all of this. Every human did. It was part of who they were, written into their blood and bones. Most of the time, it stayed quiet. Most of the time, they chose to be peaceful, to cooperate, to build rather than destroy. But sometimes, something woke it up. Was still talking when Lyra reached him. He was explaining to the other delegates how the belt would be divided, which species would be allowed to mine there, and which would be excluded. His voice was confident, certain. He had already won. He was just explaining the terms of victory. He did not see her until her hands were on him. Her fingers closed around his torso, finding the gaps between his scales where the skin was softer. Her legs bent, driving power down through her feet into the adjusting floor. Her back straightened, and her arms pulled, and suddenly 400 kilograms of Commander was moving in a direction he had never expected to move. Up. Had never been lifted by another being in his adult life. His species did not lift each other. Their gravity was too high, their bodies too heavy. The concept of being picked up was something from childhood, from the time before strength, from the time before becoming what he was. For one eternal moment, he hung in the air, suspended by hands that should not have been strong enough to hold him. His amber eyes were wide, his mouth open, his claws scratching at nothing. He looked like exactly what he was. A predator that had just discovered it was not at the top of the food chain. Then Lyra threw him. Her shoulders rotated, her hips turned, and all the energy she had gathered released at once. Flew through the air, his body spinning, his limbs flailing. He sailed past the table, past the frozen delegates, past the windows that looked out at the stars. He hit the safety railing at the edge of the platform. The metal bent under his weight but did not break. He tumbled over it, falling into the cargo netting that hung 3 levels below, a safety measure installed for exactly this kind of accident. The platform went silent. The delegates stared. The ambassador's mouth hung open. The representative's shell had changed color, something that happened when they were in shock. The slights were flashing in patterns that had no meaning, just pure surprise expressed in bioluminescence. Lyra stood at the edge of the platform, breathing steadily. Her heart rate was already slowing. Her muscles were relaxing. The thing that had woken up inside her was settling back down, satisfied that the point had been made. She looked down at. He was tangled in the netting, his limbs twisted awkwardly, his scales scraped but not bleeding. He was staring up at her with an expression she had never seen on a face before. Fear. She turned back to the delegates. They were still frozen, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. She could see their minds working, their assumptions about humanity crumbling, their entire understanding of the galactic order shifting on its foundation. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Commander was feeling unwell. I suggested he take some time to rest." No one laughed. No one moved. "Perhaps," she continued, "we should take a brief break before continuing our discussion. I'm sure everyone would benefit from a moment to collect themselves." The ambassador was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, uncertain. You lifted him, you threw him." "Yes. He weighs 400 kilograms. "I'm aware." "How is that possible?" Lyra considered the question. It was a fair one. She had never had to explain this before, not to aliens, not to creatures that had looked at humanity and seen something small and weak and unthreatening. "Humans evolved on a planet called Earth," she said. "It is a beautiful world, full of life and diversity. It is also extremely dangerous. Not in the way your worlds are dangerous, with extreme temperatures or toxic atmospheres. Dangerous in other ways. Dangerous in ways you do not expect." She paused, letting the words settle. "Our ancestors were prey. Small, soft, vulnerable. Everything hunted them. Giant cats with teeth the length of your claws. Wolves that worked in packs, coordinating to bring down creatures many times their size. Bears that could tear a human apart with a single swipe." The delegates were listening now, their earlier shock giving way to something else. Curiosity, concern. "We should have died out. By all logic, by all the rules that govern evolution, we should have been extinct before we ever learned to use fire. But we did not die out. We survived. We thrived. And eventually, we became the most successful predators our planet had ever seen." "How?" the representative asked. His voice was a clicking sound, translated by the devices they all wore. "How did prey become predator?" "We refused to give up," Lyra said. "We learned to work together. We learned to use tools. We learned to think, to plan, to wait. And we learned to throw." She raised her arm, demonstrating the rotation of her shoulder, the flexibility of her wrist. "This joint is designed for throwing. It is the most efficient throwing mechanism in the known galaxy. We can hurl objects at speeds and with accuracy that no other species can match. Rocks, spears, anything we can hold. Our ancestors used this ability to bring down prey from a distance, to defend themselves from predators, to kill anything that threatened them." She lowered her arm. "The same mechanics that make us good at throwing also make us good at lifting. Our muscles are designed for sustained effort, for carrying loads over long distances, for physical labor that would exhaust other species. We do not look strong because our strength is not for display. It is for use." She looked at the delegates, one by one, meeting their eyes. "We are not prey," she said. "We never were. We are something else entirely. Something that looks like prey, acts like prey, and then does what you just saw me do." From somewhere below, there was a sound of movement, was being helped out of the netting by his own delegation, who had arrived to investigate the commotion. Lyra did not look down. She kept her attention on the delegates in front of her. "Now," she said, "shall we continue the negotiations? I believe we were discussing the belt." The ambassador blinked. Yes, I suppose we should." "Excellent." Lyra walked to the table and took her seat. Her device was still on the floor where it had fallen, but she did not need it anymore. The negotiations had changed. Everything had changed. She could feel it in the way the other delegates looked at her, in the new tension in the air, in the subtle shifting of power that was happening all around her. The delegates took their seats. No one mentioned, no one asked if he would be returning. They simply began to talk, their voices careful and measured, their eyes occasionally flicking to Lyra as if to confirm that she was still there, still small, still soft, still capable of doing what they had just seen. The conversation went differently than it had before. There was a new willingness to consider humanity's claims, a new openness to compromise. The ambassador suggested a shared mining arrangement. The representative offered technical assistance. The lights flickered in patterns that indicated agreement. Lyra listened and responded and negotiated, doing her job the way she had always done it, with patience, with professionalism, with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. Below the platform was being examined by medical staff. He was not injured, not seriously. His pride had taken the worst of it. He refused to look up at the platform, refused to acknowledge what had happened, refused to admit that everything he believed about the galaxy had just been proven wrong. But he knew, they all knew now. Humanity was not prey. Humanity had never been prey. And if the galaxy had made assumptions about what that meant, about what humans were capable of, about how they should be treated, well, they would need to revise those assumptions. Part 3, the recalculation. The news spread across Orbital Junction 9 within hours. By the time the station's lights dimmed to simulate evening, every species on board knew what had happened on Platform 7. A human ambassador had lifted a commander and thrown him off the platform. She had done it easily, casually, as if it had cost her nothing. The details varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said she had caught him in mid-swing, turning his own attack against him. Others said she had waited until his back was turned, striking with the patience of a predator stalking its prey. A few claimed she had smiled while she did it, showing teeth in the way humans sometimes did when they were about to do something violent. All of them agreed on one thing. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. Station security arrived at the platform to find being untangled from the cargo netting by his own delegation. He was unhurt, physically at least. His scales were scraped in places where they had rubbed against the mesh, and there was a new stiffness in the way he moved, as if every muscle in his body had tensed and not yet relaxed. The security chief was one of the four-legged creatures with fur the color of autumn leaves. She had seen many things in her years on the station: fights between delegates, assassination attempts, a trade dispute that had escalated to the point where one species had tried to decompress an entire section. She had never seen a look afraid. "Commander," she said, approaching carefully, "are you injured?" He did not answer immediately. His amber eyes were fixed on something in the distance, something only he could see. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been before. Quieter, less certain. "I am not injured. Do you wish to file a complaint against Ambassador?" Again, silence. His claws flexed at his sides, but there was no threat in the gesture. It looked more like nervousness, like the unconscious movement of someone who was thinking very hard about something they did not want to think about. "No," he said finally, "no complaint." The security chief did not press the matter. She had been doing this job long enough to know when to ask questions and when to let things go. Whatever had happened on that platform, whatever had passed between the commander and the human ambassador, it was not her concern. She made her notes and moved on. There were other matters to attend to, other disputes to mediate. The station never stopped moving, never stopped changing. It was like a living thing, always growing, always adapting. Just like the species that lived within it. The negotiations concluded later that day. The final agreement gave humanity a significant share of the belt mining rights, far more than anyone had expected. The delegation accepted the terms without argument. Their commander was not present for the signing. Lyra signed the documents with a stylus designed for human fingers, pressing her mark onto the digital surface. The other delegates signed as well, their various appendages leaving their own unique impressions. When it was done, there was a moment of quiet, a recognition that something significant had happened. "Ambassador," the delegate said, breaking the silence, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." The was old, older than most of her species lived. Her fur had faded to a pale gray, and her movements were slow and deliberate. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched species climb to dominance and then fade into extinction. She had thought she understood how the galaxy worked. Now she was not sure. "We were told," she said carefully, "that humans were a young species, cooperative, non-threatening. We were told that your rise was an accident of timing, that you had simply been lucky enough to avoid the conflicts that shaped the older civilizations." Lyra nodded. "That is what was told. But it is not the truth. It is part of the truth, the part that was easiest to share." The leaned forward, her 4 legs adjusting to keep her balanced. And the other part, the part that was not shared. Lyra considered her words carefully. This was a moment that mattered, a moment that would shape how the galaxy saw humanity for generations to come. She could soften the truth, make it easier to accept. She could emphasize the cooperative nature of her species, the preference for peace, the genuine desire to build rather than destroy. Or she could tell the full truth. We are cooperative, she said. We find it more efficient than the alternative. We prefer to build relationships to find common ground, to solve problems without violence. These are not lies. These are choices. And when cooperation fails? Lyra looked at the old. She thought about her ancestors, about the long line of survivors that stretched back to the first humans who had looked at a world full of predators and refused to accept their place in the food chain. She thought about persistence hunting, about the endless chase, about the patience that could outlast anything. Then we remember what we are, she said simply. We are persistence predators, ambassador. We do not have claws or venom or armored hides. We have patience, endurance, and the absolute certainty that if we keep coming, eventually our target will fall. The room was quiet. The other delegates were listening, absorbing the words, fitting them into their understanding of the galaxy. Our ancestors hunted creatures many times their size, Lyra continued. Not by overpowering them, by outlasting them. They would follow their prey for hours, for days, walking while it ran, tracking while it hid. The prey would exhaust itself. The prey would collapse, and then our ancestors would be there. She paused. We do not give up, ever. It is not in our nature. If you challenge us, if you threaten us, if you push us beyond what we can accept, we will not stop until the matter is resolved. We will find a way. We always find a way. There was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. And yet you choose peace. Yes, Lyra said. Because we have learned, over thousands of years of conflict with each other, that peace is better. Building is better than destroying. Cooperation is better than competition. But that does not mean we have forgotten how to fight. It means we have chosen not to. There is a difference. Yes, a very important one. The signing ceremony ended shortly after. The delegates dispersed to their quarters, to their ships, to their communications systems, where they would send reports to their governments about what had happened. Lyra remained on the platform for a few minutes, looking out at the stars through the windows that lined the room. She thought about what would come next. The news would spread beyond the station, beyond this sector, across the entire galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity as harmless would reconsider. Species that had planned to exploit human territory would revise their plans. The balance of power would shift, in ways small and large. She hoped it would shift toward peace. That was the goal, after all. Not to frighten the galaxy into submission, but to earn respect. To show that humanity could be a partner, an ally, a force for stability in a universe that often lacked it. But if respect required strength, then strength she would show. Her device buzzed with an incoming message. She picked it up and read the text. It was from the Consortium of Free Worlds, the small species that had abandoned the negotiations that morning. They were asking if it was too late to reconsider their position. They had heard what had happened, and they wanted to discuss an alliance. Lyra smiled. Not the kind of smile that showed teeth, not the kind that meant something violent was about to happen. Just a small, tired smile, the kind that came after a long day of work that had finally paid off. She began to type a response. In the weeks that followed, the galactic databases were quietly updated. The entry for humanity had been sparse before, a few paragraphs about a young species from an unremarkable planet orbiting an unremarkable star. It had listed their physical characteristics, their technology level, their political organization. It had described them as emerging cooperative species, low threat profile, limited territorial expansion. The new entry was different. It was longer, more detailed, written with a care that suggested the authors wanted to make sure nothing was missed. It described human physiology in terms that emphasized strength and endurance rather than vulnerability. It mentioned persistence hunting. It included a warning about underestimating human capabilities in physical confrontations. The classification had changed as well. Apex persistence predator, it now read. Exercise extreme caution. A footnote was added at the bottom, one that would be referenced by diplomats and military planners and curious researchers for centuries to come. It was simple, direct, and it captured something essential about the species it described. Do not mistake their diplomacy for weakness. They choose peace. They are not compelled to it. Commander read the new entry from his quarters aboard the flagship. He had not returned to the station after the incident. He had not returned to any station where humans might be present. His superiors had not punished him for what had happened, but they had not rewarded him either. His career had stalled, suspended in a kind of limbo while the implications of his encounter were analyzed and discussed. He thought about that moment often, the feeling of being lifted, the sudden, terrible realization that everything he believed was wrong, the look in the human's eyes, calm and patient and utterly without fear. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated all of them, and in the end, that underestimation had cost him everything. Somewhere in the vastness of space, other species were reaching the same conclusion. They were reading the new database entries, watching the recordings that had spread across the galactic network, talking among themselves about what it meant. Some were afraid. Some were excited. Some were simply curious, wondering what else they had missed about the small, soft creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. And on Orbital Junction 9, Ambassador Lyra continued her work. She met with delegates, negotiated agreements, built the relationships that would shape humanity's place in the galaxy. She did it with patience and professionalism and a quiet confidence that everyone around her now understood differently than before. She was still the same person she had always been, small by galactic standards, soft-skinned. No claws, no venom, no armored plates. But now the galaxy knew what that meant. Now they understood that behind the diplomatic smile and the professional demeanor was something ancient and patient and absolutely relentless. Humanity had arrived, and they were not going anywhere. The end.